Moving on to the next part, sleeves. There are obviously many different types of sleeve designs you can do for Snow White, but I knew I didn't want to do the strips that so many people do, and I quite like the Disney Parks design with the pear-shaped slits in the sleeve. So here I've got the practice run that I've been modelling on. It doesn't really look anything amazing, but this is how everything starts. And the idea is I want these ruchy type red bits to pull through. That will look a bit sort of crimpled and clumped. I don't know how to describe it. So a bit mushed up, and eventually I hope to maybe put this piece here, put some little pearls on it eventually. So, but that idea might go out the window yet, I'm not sure. So basically it is a very involved sleeve, very complicated. We went through numerous ways trying to work out how to line the slits the best. So first of all, I've got some red fabric here, and I don't know if you can see in this light, if the video will pick it up, but I know the photos have picked it up quite well, but you can see I've measured out some dots here. The dots are 1 inch squares, so 1 inch that way and 1 inch that way. I wasn't sure exactly how much to do, so I've just done a great big piece here and I have measured it. So because obviously when you do the bunching, it will eat up the fabric quite a lot. I was going to go for a lighter red, but I went for my fabric boxes and I found this. I think it's sort of a polyester version of a raw silk, because it's got a bit of those textured grainy lines to it, but it's definitely the polyester version, and it's got a bit of sheen to it, so it's quite nice. It's a bit darker than I thought I'd go for, but it actually will look quite nice, so that's what I've decided to use. This here is my sleeve pattern piece, the final design I've come up with. You notice you have the longer end this side. This goes round to the back where you have a lot more room in the armhole to go around, so that's the longer side. Mine is 22 inches long by 9.5 inches tall. Now it depends how big you want your sleeve to be, but I'm quite a small person, and for me, as you can see on this bodice here, that seemed to be just right. So I mean, you might want it a bit puffier, you might want it wider or a bit taller. It's completely up to you. So that's the pattern piece ready to go. Okay, now I got this idea from a smocking tutorial video, but I'm doing it completely differently, and this is in no way exactly how you do smocking. This is my own made up thing. So it basically, I just want to create a little rumpled mess. So what I came up with, I've done these little boxes I showed earlier that I don't know if the camcorder will pick up, but the photos have, so you can see it better there. Between I've got 2 dots there, one there, one there. So I'm going to come up halfway between those little dots with a needle and thread. And then I'm going to find my other dots. There's one here and one there, and then I'm going to go down between those 2 dots. As I say, I completely twisted this around how it's supposed to be done, but now where I've just gone down, I'm going to come up just like a millimetre or 2 from where I just went down. So now I've come back up, I'll then get the next 2 dots in the next section of this box, and I'm going to go between those like so, and where I've just gone down there where I'm pulling, I'm going to come up just beside it, and then again I've got my next two dots here and here. I'm going to go halfway between those. Basically I'm creating a little diamond shape at the end, and then come up and then back to where I started and come down just to the side of it. So now you've got your box there with your dots, you've made a little diamond shape, and now I'm just going to pull it and just create a bit of a mess as I call it, and underneath I'm just holding where I've pulled it all in. Each one comes out very different, you can see there, no two come out the same, and I'm just holding it together with my fingers underneath, and I'm just tightening it off with some sewing. Make sure it's pretty tight or they will come undone. There we go, and then I just cut it off. Not too worried about the dots because it's so dark you won't see many of them anyway, but eventually I hope it will look something like this practice piece I did before. Okay, I've now finished creating my crumpled bit of mess, as you can see. It's all lovely and messy. Don't worry, it'll turn out quite beautiful when it just pokes through the sleeves. Now the whole piece, before I did any of this, I measured it. It was 1 meter 50 long by 79 centimeters wide. So that's how big the whole piece of red fabric was before I created all this crumpled mess. Okay, so this is my sleeve pattern. Bear in mind I'm a small person, so I didn't want it so massively big. It's made of, it's actually a tablecloth cover I got in some kind of polyester brocade. Picked up brand new in a packet for £1 at a car boot, so that was quite nice, unused. It's very lightweight and it's been overlocked along all the edges because it frays like crazy. I'll just show you the measurements quickly. From the centre, this is about 25 high, and across, so I just had to pause it because I had to switch hands. Measuring across, it comes to about 55 centimetres, or roughly 21.5 inch. So okay, we'll go on to the next part. A quick repeater moment here. Here's one I prepared earlier. There's a sneak peek of what it should look like in the end. But we need to create these 3 holes, which was a pain to decide what exactly I'm going to do here. So this is the idea. Basically I'm going to create slits. So you don't actually cut out a hole shape, though you can cut out a diamond shape if you really want to, but then you'll end up in a diamond shape. So we took some measurements earlier. First of all, we need to find the halfway point on the sleeve, so I folded it over. Now you will think this is a funny shape, but this is how a sleeve's done because the distance on the back is a bit longer than the front, so this bit will eventually go into the back of your bodice, so just remember that. That's an important point. And also, if you've got a front to back to your fabric, remember to do opposite sides when you cut them out for each one. This isn't too much of a problem, but just point that out if you have a good and a bad side to your fabric. So we've folded it in half now. We just need to put a pin at the top and a pin at the bottom. I just get my assistant to do that.
Okay, on our instructions we are working from 4.5 centimeters from the bottom edge. So go to the middle point and mark 4.5 centimetres from the bottom. Working with the middle slit first, from the pin that you've just put in, we're going to measure up 12 centimetres with another pin. From the halfway point at 6 centimetres, we're going to measure outwards 4 centimetres, so that's 2 centimetres this side and 2 centimetres the other side. So I've now put a pin 2 centimetres from the centre and 2 centimetres from the centre this way. Next we're going to draw a line from the top pin down to the bottom pin. Next I'm going to draw a curve from the centre line, and it's going to curve in slightly right to the bottom, and same with this one, and then I'm going to go the opposite side and join the middle one up and then back down to the bottom, so that the slits will be level with each other. Taking the centre point of this line here, put a tape measure across, measuring from this point down to this point and this point down to this point. Make sure that they're the same, so you know that you've got a level to work from. The next measurement we're going to make is from the centre of this one across 10 centimetres. So starting with your middle mark, we're going to measure 10 centimetres that way and put a pin in. And then from the centre mark we're going to come this way and mark 10 centimetres again. And then we'll do exactly the same that we did for this slit. We're going to make sure that this is a vertical line to start with. Then we're going to measure 4.5 centimetres from the bottom upwards and put a pin. And then going back to our drawing, the next mark will be 10 centimetres from that point upwards. So that's from this point, we're now going to measure 10 centimetres upwards. Okay, we can take this pin out now. That was just a marker. So we're going to find the halfway point now between this point and put a pin. And then from that mark we're going to measure out again 2 centimetres this way and 2 centimetres this way. And now that we have our marks, we can draw a straight line from this pin to this pin, and then do another curve all the way up to this pin and all the way down. And following those exact same instructions, we're going to do another slit over this side.
Okay, I've now drawn all my slits so I can take all my pins out. I'm also going to keep my pinning at the top here because it'll be helpful later when I run my gathering stitches, but you can just see the oval shapes here. Okay, next to create the hole slits, I've cut 3 pieces of this fabric. It's a polyester crepe and it's very light. I advise that you use a light fabric. I will be painting it after. It's basically the liner, but if you have some blue then it'd be better if you use that. But this is all I had hanging around. So basically what we did, we marked on the blue sleeve earlier just to make it easier for you to see and also be more accurate, because the sleeve is all one piece. So we've pinned these on for now and transferred the marks to the white stuff. I've got here the liner, and I'll be basically cutting slits, and then these will be joined together to stop them moving inside. Okay, just as an extra security measure and precaution, I've put some extra pins around the pieces just to hold them still, because you don't want them moving. You don't want to just rely on the 4 points that you've made for your oval shapes. Now what I'm going to do is go and sew a line following the shape of this oval, which I'll show you afterwards. I've now sewn my oval shapes. You can just see here the stitching line. I've used a number 2 and I've started, you'll notice where I've left some tails so you can see better. About here, I haven't started at the top. Started just off on the side here and finished up on the side. And at the very tops, I've actually turned to a number 1 stitch, so I can just go across a couple of stitches. So I'm not going to a direct point, I'm just coming across a couple because I felt that was much easier and it finishes it off much nicer. Makes it easier to turn in if you just turn your stitch length down a little bit. Next I'll be getting some small scissors and cutting a slit where the lines have been drawn. Okay, I've now cut my slits like so. And now we want to do some understitching, which is a very important part to do so that it helps force the fabric underneath a lot better. Next we want to take the white fabric and bring it through to the inside and make sure these flaps are pointing that way, and you want to pull this as tight as possible. You can just see here I've pulled through the fabric to the inside and I've pulled this really tight and pinned it in place. Next I'll be running a sewing line just 2 to 3 millimeters in from the edge that looks like this. It's really hard to get to the top and the bottom, so you probably won't be able to manage it, but you'll probably get at least up to about here and here, top and bottom. Okay, so just folding this over here, you can see what I've done. As I said earlier, it's a bit hard to get right to the very top, so just run my stitching line just there. Sorry, just turn this around, and when you come to turn your liner to the inside and through the hole like so, it'll just help it force it under that little bit more and make it that much neater. And then I just recommend giving it a little bit of a press with an iron all the way around, and that will help keep it in place even further. So that's it more or less for that part, and then we'll move on to the next. Right, now this is where it starts to be a bit of a pain, because obviously you've got these corners and they're not very easy to manipulate. So if you've got one of these little arm things that you iron with, it's quite handy because it's got a narrower end. So I recommend not only trying to pull this through as tight as possible without, you know, putting too much force on it or you rip your sewing, but trying to also pull it tight that way as well. That's what I found works best. Even then you will still get a little bit of white showing through. It's really hard, and then it will make it just a bit easier to sort of manipulating it a little bit there and just holding it for a bit to try and get a crisp edge. But this is where the painting will come in after, because I'm actually going to paint the edge of line of blue just so it prevents that coming through. As I said, that's probably the best tip I can give you here, is just to work it round just a little bit at a time. Obviously you don't want to stretch it too much, you want to be really careful, but that's my tip, is to try and sort of pull your liner through so you don't see too much of it, and also when you come to your corners to try and pull it that way just a little tiny bit. Okay, next we want to tidy up the inside a bit. As you can see, we've now turned our edges in. I've pressed them with the iron. Doesn't look like much at the moment, and the inside is kind of a mess, but basically you're just taking the edge of this and turning it in. Just see that I've turned the edge in all the way along, and I've done the same with the other side. Sorry, there, that's tucked tight in there, and just pulled them together tight. This is why I'm going to paint it in a bit, because you will never eliminate the odd bit of white coming through that might roll around to the outside. So, but if you have some blue, you don't have to worry about painting. It's just that it was just all I had lying around. So yeah, just basically, and then just catch stitched it in place here with some little stitches all the way along. Every now and then I'm strengthening it with double stitches, so it just helps pull it in from the edge a bit. So once I've done the same here, I might just put the odd little tack around the edges just to hold them there, but it doesn't really need it. Okay, now moved on to the painting stage. I'm using Dial on Fabric Paint in Royal Blue. It's a bit darker than the colour of the sleeve, but it's okay. It's the same colour as the bodice. So I've just painted here around the edges, and then, as I said earlier, you will not get some white bits just showing through, so if any of the liner does roll through a little bit, it will show up blue and the same colour of the sleeve rather than ugly white. So I'm just waiting for that to dry, and then we'll actually start to move on putting the red stuff in and putting the sleeve in. Yay! The paint is now dry on the back, so I've gone ahead and run a couple of gathering stitches along the top of the sleeve, and I start from the middle and go out so that the tails end up at either end of the sleeve, and then I've run one along the bottom. Don't forget, you don't need to start the end on the bottom because you've got your seam allowance, and the same with the top, so come in a little bit because you won't be gathering that 1.5 centimetres or so for your seam. Next, you want to take your red stuff and you want to pin it just probably at least a couple of inches from the bottom, because don't forget you've got to have that for your seam. So more or less line it up with where my white stuff is, more or less. So I've just started pinning it there, and then I put a couple of pins, it's really hard to see, there's a couple of pins there on the sides, and then what I did is make sure there's still enough to pull through to the outside, so you just want to manipulate it a bit at a time. If you can't pull enough through, obviously just loosen some of your pins. You can just see here my other pins on the outside, just holding it all together. So just do that a bit at a time till you're happy that you're going to have enough to be able to pull through your holes. And then we can now cut the excess off. Okay, I've now cut the red piece to more or less the same shape as the sleeve, and just a bit shorter because obviously you've still got to sew your sleeve in. Okay, I want to stop the red stuff from moving, so where I had the pins, I'm just running some little tiny stitches that just go through to the outside, but you barely see it. So I'm just going to go down, and I'm just going to turn it over so I can see, just holding the red stuff, and you just go in literally 0.5 millimetre, just doing little tiny prick stitches, preferably with a good matching thread, the same colour. Just doing a few of these just so it holds it in place, and I'm just doing a few in various places around just to stop it from moving. Okay, before I go any further, I want to work on doing the armband cuff. Sorry, sleeve cuff, I called it an armband, silly me. Right, because I'd already done this and I'd already done a mock-up beforehand, I know exactly what my measurements were going to be, but to make sure you don't want it too tight or too loose, you can get somebody to put the tape measure around your arm in the place more or less where your cuff ends up, and just take a measurement from there all the way around. I want mine to finish up at 29.5, and so I need to add the seam allowance onto that, so it comes to 1.5 seam allowance each end, comes to 32.5 now. So this is 32.5 centimetres long by 8 centimetres wide. I'm using the same yellow fabric here that I used on the skirt for the underneath layer, and I've also spray starched it a little bit just to make it a little bit crisper, although I will be putting a piece of stiffener inside it. Next we are folding the band in half with bad side to bad side of your fabric, so you've got the shiny side of this fabric on the outside. Okay, next we need to open the band, so you've got the good side facing up, and you want to make the seam for your cuff, which is about 1.5 centimetres going down. Next I've sewn the sleeve on the arm cuff, and then you also need to do the same for the seam on your sleeve. So sew that together, good side to good side. Okay, now fold your sleeve in half and mark your halfway point with a pin. Next, also do the same for your band. Find the halfway point and mark it with a pin. I'm going to gather the bottom of the cuff. So take one of the tail threads that you left earlier and just pull it gently to fit. Turn your cuff the right way out and match it with seam to seam. This is just, we're just sort of trialing this. It should work out because it's the same as the other one, but we always like to just double check everything anyway. As at this point, if anything's too slack or too loose, you can sort it out properly.
I thought you were going to...
Okay, now we also match up the halfway points. Like so. And you're just placing some pins just at various points around it to hold your band. Right, we've now got that in place, and you can see here, you make sure that your seams match up, seam to seam. And now I'm going to run a sewing stitch around the whole of it, 1.5 centimetre in, to make a seam. Okay, we've now sewn our band in, and we're just going to pull it out. And this is where your crease line you did earlier comes in handy. Okay, you cut your piece of stiffener out, you need to cut it a bit shorter than the length of your band. We're making a start now, putting the piece of stiffener into the band. It's a little bit fiddly, but basically you've got to stuff it right inside, right inside where you can see the yellow. We're going to perform 2 turns here. We're going to turn the top edge in about 1.5 centimetres, and then we're going to pull it down and cover all that messy stuff there that you can see on the inside, and put a pin there. Like so, and this is what you're going to do all the way around it. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to run some little catch stitches around the bottom to hold it in place, which I'll show you once that is complete.